The scenes are simply hellish. So much suffering from India's invisible killer.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the 10 scariest events that occurred in the 1980s.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
The Mount St. Helens eruption.
Such is the force of Mount St. Helens lateral eruption that an incredible 1,300 feet of mountain disappears almost instantly.
It's not often that the United States experiences a volcanic eruption, but they experienced a huge one on May 18, 1980. This explosion was almost biblical in nature, with the entire north face of the mountain collapsing and sliding away to form the largest landslide ever recorded.
I glanced over at the mountain, and the entire north face was in motion, was sliding down. And it's such an unbelievable view that I shook my head and I said, am I really seeing this?
This collapse then uncorked a massive lateral blast, flattening everything in its path. A plume of black ash towered 80,000 feet into the air, while the surrounding area, which was once a lush green forest, was now a dead, gray, apocalyptic wasteland. When the eruption was done, ash had been deposited throughout 11 states, approximately 57 people were dead, and the mountain now had a gaping hole where its summit once stood.
Mount St. Helens continues to erupt until late in the afternoon. Ashfall forced towns and cities up to 300 miles away into a state of emergency shutdown. In just over 2 weeks, the ash circled the entire globe.
The Tylenol poisonings.
We're marking the anniversary of one of the most notorious, unsolved mass killings in American history.
Throughout the fall of 1982, at least 7 people died in the greater Chicago area after taking Tylenol that had been laced with cyanide. Investigators quickly determined that the poisoning did not stem from the manufacturing process, meaning that someone was opening bottles on store shelves and manually inserting the poison.
I watched family end. I don't know how anybody could do anything like that.
The total randomness of the act terrorized the country, many of whom feared becoming the next innocent victim. The deaths also caused a media frenzy and a mass panic, with over 30 million bottles of Tylenol being recalled throughout the country. To make matters even worse, the culprit was never caught, the lack of resolution leaving behind a haunting sense of vulnerability and mystery. Who would do this and why? Perhaps we'll never know.
Even 40 years later, the mystery is still compromising with investigators and fascinating everybody.
The Mexico City earthquake.
Está temblando un poquitito. No se asusten, vamos a quedarnos. Les doy la hora. 7 de la mañana, Chihuahua. 7 de la mañana, 19 minutos 42 segundos. Tiempo del centro de México. Sigue temblando un poquitito, pero pues vamos a tomarlo con una gran tranquilidad.
At 7:19 a.m., Mexico City was hit with a monumental earthquake. The epicenter was about 200 miles away off the coast of Michoacan, but the soft clay soil of the ancient lakebed amplified the seismic waves, leading to extreme shaking. Many of the city's buildings were also poorly constructed, resulting in the total collapse of over 400 structures.
The earthquake caused losses that will take years of effort and millions of dollars to restore.
A further 3,124 suffered extensive damage, and entire city blocks were destroyed, leaving behind an apocalyptic landscape of rubble and dust. Thousands of people were killed, and to make matters worse, the initial response from the Mexican government was slow and disorganized, leading to widespread public anger. The earthquake destroyed much of the city and revealed its vulnerability.
The earthquakes of September 1985 in Mexico City attest to the vulnerability of large cities to catastrophic earthquakes and should serve as a reminder to all Latin American countries, the U.S., and some Caribbean nations.
The Ethiopian famine. We're reminded of the Ethiopian famine every single year in the form of the charity single, Do They Know It's Christmas? The song was written to raise money and awareness for the Ethiopian famine, which ravaged the country between 1983 and 1985. This was one of the most devastating humanitarian disasters of the 20th century, killing 300,000 to 1 million people and displacing millions more.
It's now just after 6 in the morning here at Coram, where thousands have been sleeping overnight in a bare field in the cold. I'm wearing 3 layers of clothing at the moment, and I'm very cold. Children, adults have been trying to get through the night wearing bare, thin rag.
The scale of the crisis went largely unnoticed until journalists began smuggling out footage. It was a stark reminder of how easily suffering can occur out of sight and in the midst of a seemingly globalized world. Said footage was also haunting, with images of skeletal children and mass graves shocking the world and leading to an outpouring of support.
Turned on to the TV, and the first thing was Tigray and Wallo, and so much for the dinner. We forgot completely. My wife was crying, I was crying.
Pan Am Flight 103.
5 miles below, the people of Lockerbie prepare for Christmas. Michael Gordon is chatting with a friend when a strange rumbling noise fills his house.
The deadliest terror attack in the UK's history occurred on December 21st, 1988. Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over the small town of Lockerbie, Scotland, killing all 259 on board. The aircraft broke apart in midair and rained flaming pieces of debris onto the small Scottish town, causing significant destruction and killing a further 11 people.
And then, from my right, quite high on my right, I could see a long, thin, black object which had a fire on the upper surface coming in. And it was making its way towards Lockerbie.
The explosion was the result of a deliberate bombing, and while it has been officially ascribed to Libyan nationalists, much doubt and speculation has been raised regarding their involvement. The ongoing debate surrounding the true nature of the bombing has only added a further degree of agitation to an already horrifying event.
In a small church, near where the dying plane's cockpit landed, is a stark reminder of the toll of terror and the importance of bringing the guilty to justice.
The Bhopal disaster.
Authorities now say the toxic gas that escaped from a Union Carbide plant on Monday has killed at least 1,600 people, and they say another 50,000 people may suffer serious after effects such as blindness and sterility.
The Indian city of Bhopal hosted a pesticide plant belonging to Union Carbide India Limited. The plant stored large quantities of methyl isocyanate, or MIC, a highly toxic chemical used in the production of pesticides. Thanks to a number of errors, water accidentally entered one of the tanks on December 2, 1984, creating a runaway exothermic reaction that caused the safety valve to rupture, releasing a dense cloud of toxic gas into the surrounding area.
At one point, an official said one death was being recorded every minute from the poison gas leak in the city of Bhopal.
Nearby residents were exposed to the toxic cloud, and thousands died within the first few hours of exposure. And while the overall death toll is hard to measure, an estimated 16,000 people are believed to have died in the following years due to gas-related illnesses.
Union Carbide acknowledged today that 2 years ago, the company had major concerns about the safety conditions for methyl isocyanate at its plant in Bhopal, India.
The Challenger disaster.
Looks like a couple of the solid rocket boosters blew away from the side of the shuttle in an explosion.
A space shuttle explosion is always a tragedy, but it was the pomp and circumstance surrounding the Challenger that made it a national disaster. The mission was part of the Teacher in Space project, an initiative meant to get kids interested in science, astronomy, and space exploration.
Usually the night before, I had the same nightmare that what I saw today, and I thought it was a dream. I was speechless for a few minutes.
As such, an everyday teacher named Krista McAuliffe was chosen to accompany the astronauts, and the launch was watched in countless schools across the country. Unfortunately, the shuttle suffered a catastrophic failure just over a minute into its launch, causing it to disintegrate in a gigantic plume of smoke and killing everyone on board. Millions of children watched the disaster unfold on live TV, creating a sense of national trauma that is still being felt to this day.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
The AIDS epidemic emerges.
People who, because they had been diagnosed, suddenly disappeared. And we all knew what that silence meant.
The 1980s was hit by a new fear of a new disease. The CDC published its first report on what would later be known as AIDS in 1981, and HIV was officially identified a few years later. AIDS became public knowledge throughout the decade, with widespread awareness occurring in the latter half of the 80s.
AIDS is now spreading in epidemic proportions to other segments of the population.
Naturally, an entirely new disease caused enormous panic within the general population, especially because contracting HIV was a certified death sentence at the time. The panic was further fueled by numerous factors, including HIV's unknown cause and transmission, the lack of government response, the stigma surrounding the disease, and sensationalist media coverage, with some headlines even calling it a plague.
You've tested positive for HIV, which is the virus that causes AIDS.
Cold War tensions.
They're on their way to Russia. They take about 30 minutes to reach their target. So do theirs, right?
While it started in the 40s, the Cold War was alive and well in the 1980s. In fact, some people refer to this as the Second Cold War, as the relative détente of the 1970s was destroyed by renewed hostilities. President Ronald Reagan also took a highly aggressive stance against the Soviet Union, including his famous Evil Empire speech of 1983.
I pointed out that as good Marxist-Leninists, the Soviet leaders have openly and publicly declared that the only morality they recognize is that which will further their cause, which is world revolution.
As such, the fear of a full-scale nuclear war was deeply embedded in the public consciousness, with many schools around the country participating in nuclear bombing drills. Naturally, cultural anxiety was taught. This doom and gloom was reflected in pop culture, with movies like War Games, The Day After, and Threads reflecting the paranoid atmosphere of the day.
Jesus Christ, they've done it. They've done it. Where are you going?
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. Chernobyl.
It means the core is open. It means the fire we're watching with our own eyes is giving off nearly twice the radiation released by the bomb in Hiroshima. And that's every single hour, hour after hour. 20 hours since the explosion, so 40 bombs worth by now.
The reputation of nuclear energy was permanently tarnished on April 26, 1986, when a reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. A combination of operator error and major design flaws, the explosion sent an enormous radioactive cloud billowing into the atmosphere. The massive release of radiation was unprecedented and caused panic throughout much of Europe, as everyone feared the effects of the fallout.
The wind has been blowing toward Germany. Not letting children play outside. In Frankfurt.
The human cost is also unavoidable. Radiation sickness painfully claimed many lives, and nearby cities were evacuated, leaving behind unsettling radioactive ghost towns that still exist to this day. Luckily, the heroic efforts of many scientists and liquidators prevented a monumental disaster from spiraling into something even worse.
You'll do it because it must be done. You'll do it because nobody else can. And if you don't, millions will die. If you tell me that's not enough, I won't believe you.
Were you around to experience these events yourself? Let us know in the comments below.
I was terrified of passing on HIV to someone else.